Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has stressed that the foiled armed incursion of May 3rd was a covert operation ordered by US President Donald Trump. China is the first country to report that the risk of the COVID-19 outbreak is now low, as no new local cases have been reported during the past few days. The World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa stated that the coronavirus is predicted to peak in about 4 to 6 weeks in African countries if more is not done. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. In an exclusive interview with Telesur this Thursday, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro stressed that the attempted armed incursion of May 3rd was a covert operation ordered by US President Donald Trump. He also referred to the announcement by the White House that Trump has nominated a new ambassador to Venezuela, James Broward Story, formerly the interim charge d'affaires of the Venezuelan Affairs Unit based at the US Embassy in Colombia.
This man, he was the last commercial diplomat in Venezuela. We had to throw him out. He has an office in Bogota, Colombia, and I can tell you, and this will be proven through the declassified documents, that this man is responsible for the failure of this armed incursion that was military defeated in the Bay of Macuto. James Story has his feet and his hands and all of his body in this military incursion. What is Mike Pompeo doing? And Donald Trump, once again, they are giving a prize to the person who failed, because James Story, Elliot Abrams, and Mike Pompeo are responsible for this failure in the Bay of Macuto. And what Trump is doing is to give him an award, to give them prizes. This will be revealed. And Donald Trump forced this attack, and Ivan Duque was also forced by Donald Trump to send this group to see if they were able to kill me and to unleash the violence. And this is what the Americans have declared.
Mercenary incursion into Venezuela has drawn further attention to undercover operations, terrorism and arms trafficking, which all fuel irregular warfare across the world.
The private military contractor Silvercorp enlists its men as soldiers of fortune to take advantage of their military skills.
We're here. These guys mean business down.
How much would Jordan pay for the job?
I expected anywhere from 50 to 100,000.
Denman Luke Alexander.
But for this former Marine, his tactical training in advanced infiltration wasn't enough to complete his mission, which was to secure an airfield in Caracas and kidnap President Nicolas Maduro in order to take him to the United States.
Combatían para Donald Trump.
My responsibilities to Silvercorp are written in a contract, or described in a contract, signed by Jordan Goudreau, Juan Rendon, and W.H.O.
For the mercenaries, this contract was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, having as guarantee $212 million in Venezuelan funds and assets seized by the United States.
Jordan Goudreau, representative of the U.S. company Silvercorp, said that he would be in charge of the supply of weapons and the training of 3 groups of military deserters. He also introduced us that day to 2 U.S. citizens, soldiers who would take care of training us in close quarters and combat in confined areas.
For its part, the DEA, with one of its agents, put in place scenarios like these ones in popular areas of Caracas. Under threats, local drug traffickers set off a number of armed clashes with no casualties, as a distraction for the terrorist incursion.
In a conversation that I had with Antonio Sequea Torres, talking about my payment of $2 million for cooperating with the operation, he told me that I don't have to worry, that they are being financed by drug dealer W.H.O, relative of Marta Gonzalez, the wife of Cliver Alcala. They were financing the paramilitary group, which was headed by United States citizens Harold Luke and Jordan.
Since September, Venezuela has denounced in the United Nations the existence of 3 mercenary training camps in Colombia.
También serán entregadas al secretario general de esta organización.
The General Assembly approved in 1989 an international convention criminalizing the acts of recruiting, utilizing or financing mercenaries, practice being carried out in Colombia with mercenaries contracted for armed raids. A contract that the main strategist of opposition figure Juan Guaidó admitted to signing and of personally paying $50,000 for.
It was an exploratory operation to see the possibility of capturing and delivering to justice some members of the regime. It was a pact signed by Guaidó. We've been working on the formation of this special unit for months for the liberation of Venezuela.
El contrato para la invasión de Venezuela.
This is a serious crime anywhere in the world. I hope to see justice. Donald Trump, the head of this incursion, they privatized this act.
Que garantiza la justicia en Venezuela.
Unlike Colombia and the United States, Venezuela is signatory since 2012 of the International Convention against the recruitment, use, financing, and training of mercenaries.
Rolando Segura, Telesur, Caracas, Venezuela.
A group of 92 Venezuelans were set to be repatriated from Ecuador this Thursday in the framework of the Return to the Homeland plan promoted by the government of President Nicolas Maduro. This was the 37th flight out of the Ecuadorian capital in the framework of the programme, which has seen 3,242 Venezuelans repatriated so far. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan embassy in Quito is working to process more than 5,000 requests for repatriation. The latest group of Venezuelan citizens returning to their home country was subject to COVID-19 rapid tests before arriving in the country. On their return, they must undergo a quarantine period of 7 days before being tested for the virus again.
Because of the situation we are going through, not only Venezuela, but all countries around the world, that is the COVID-19 crisis. So we left. I've gone walking, and I arrived in Quito on Saturday, after walking since April 17. And I went to the Venezuelan embassy here in Quito, and thank God they're helping us, as we want to be back in Venezuela. Because I would rather face hard times in my own country than in another country, where any relative can help you out. And once there, we're not paying for rent, electricity or water. Venezuela is so much better.
More than 50 families were evicted from a homeless workers' movement camp in the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo. The eviction was carried out in Tacarau community, Piracicabas municipality. Governor João Doria claimed that the measure was adopted due to a civil construction project, which is part of supposed essential activity related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The members of the homeless workers movement resisted the forced eviction by the military police and were repressed. The move comes in the midst of the health crisis, with Brazil reporting more than 132,000 cases and over 9,000 fatalities. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases and fatalities continues to rise in the Caribbean. The Dominican Republic remains the worst hit nation in the region, with more than 9,000 confirmed cases and 373 deaths. It's followed by Cuba with more than 1,700 positive cases and 73 fatalities. Meanwhile, Jamaica has reported a total of 478 cases but has not registered any more fatalities in recent days, with the death toll remaining at 9. They're followed by Martinique, Guadeloupe and Bermuda as the countries with the highest numbers of cases reported in the region. More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. China is the first country to report that the risk of the COVID-19 outbreak is now low, as no new local cases have been reported during the past few days. According to Mi Feng, spokesperson for the National Health Commission, all the regions of China are now at low risk. The long-awaited announcement issued on Thursday came after the province of Heilongjiang became the last to reduce its risk level, according to local media. Only 2 patients have tested positive for COVID-19 in recent days, both of whom imported the infection from abroad. Around 300 people are still receiving treatment for COVID-19. Beijing officially announced it had defeated the epidemic in early April, stressing that strict quarantine measures had played a decisive role. The number of people killed by COVID-19 in Europe has surpassed 150,000, with the largest number of deaths occurring in the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain and France. In the UK, the Office of National Statistics informed in a recent report that the risk of death from COVID-19 is significantly higher among some black and minority ethnic groups than among white people. According to the office, black men are 4.2 times more likely to die from coronavirus than their white counterparts, and black women 4.3 times more likely. It's clear that the socio-economic factors impacting these mortality rates are fundamental to understanding them, as black and minority ethnic people are more likely to be exposed to the virus due to working in essential sectors that have not stopped during the lockdown. Spain has extended the state of emergency imposed to combat the novel coronavirus pandemic for 2 more weeks from Sunday, allowing the government to control people's movements as it gradually relaxes a national lockdown. Spain, where more than 25,000 people have died from COVID-19, has been under a lockdown since March 14th.
In the last 24 hours, a total of 754 new cases have been reported throughout Spain, an increase of 0.34%. It is the same downward trend that we observed. Yesterday, if I remember correctly, we had a few more cases. Today we return to this downward data with those typical ripples of the tails of epidemics, which fortunately we are already in that phase.
French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe on Thursday confirmed that the government was going to end a strict 2-month lockdown throughout the country on May 11th, even though the coronavirus was still spreading in 4 regions, including Paris. Some important restrictions will remain in place, including on urban public transport, until the situation is reassessed in early June.
The situation in the region of Paris required greatest vigilance. We call upon companies to ask their employees to work from home as much as possible. We ask the inhabitants of the region of Paris to limit their movement to what is strictly necessary, and we call on the entire population to apply the precautionary measures even more scrupulously. As for the vulnerable people, please limit your trips and contacts with other people to the strict minimum. 80 to 85% of the 50,000 schools in France have announced they will open next week, so a large part of schools will be open next week. It doesn't mean that all the pupils will go back to school. As I said, it will be progressive, especially from May 12th. So for next week, we should have slightly more than 1 million pupils who will go back to their classrooms, and there will be around 130,000 teachers to welcome them.
Millions of people have sought unemployment benefits in the past week across the United States, suggesting that the economic sectors imposing mass layoffs have expanded. According to a report issued by the US Labor Department, the economic crisis triggered by nationwide lockdowns to slow the spread of the coronavirus meant that productivity dropped at its fastest pace in more than 4 years during the first quarter of 2020. The report added that the US economy shrank in the first quarter at the steepest pace since the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009. The same report stressed that initial jobless claims for state unemployment benefits totaled more than 3,000 million for the week that ended on May 2nd. The US unemployment rate jumped to 16% in April. The US has now reported 605 new coronavirus cases on Thursday, taking the total to over 1.2 million, representing close to 1/3 of the COVID-19 cases reported worldwide. The death toll now stands at more than 76,000. The World Health Organization has stressed that calls to domestic violence hotlines in Europe have increased by as much as 3/5 as in the midst of the coronavirus lockdowns.
W.H.O is deeply troubled by the reports from many countries, including Belgium, Bulgaria, France, Ireland, Russian Federation, Spain, UK, and others, of increases in interpersonal violence, including violence against women and men, by an intimate partner and against children because of the COVID-19 response. If lockdowns were to continue for 6 months, we would expect an extra 31 million cases of gender-based violence globally. Beyond the figures, only a fraction of cases is ever reported. We talk a lot about numbers and statistics, but we must not for a moment forget the human side, the women and children who are living this reality day in and day out.
And we're taking one final break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. The World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa stated that the coronavirus is predicted to peak in about 4 to 6 weeks in African countries if more is not done. Meanwhile, Stephen Karingi of the UN Economic Commission for Africa has stressed that much of the population is struggling to secure enough food in the midst of lockdowns.
We are estimating that, and this is an estimate based on if nothing much was done, we are estimating that this would peak in about 4 to 6 weeks in African countries. We're working with countries to leverage the assets that they already have in place in terms of what was done to prepare for Ebola, some of the equipment for testing that's being used for tuberculosis and polio, and to mobilize people and repair supply chains.
Since 60% of the African population lives in informal settlements, it is becoming very difficult for them to be able to keep to the lockdowns because they need food. They wake up in the morning, go and look for money for the food, and come back, eat their food. Then the next day they go and look for their second meal. Statistic that shows that at least 70% of these people in these urban settlements have actually reported that they have seen an increase in the price of the food that they need to sustain their lives. But much more importantly, 87% of them say that they are either skipping a meal or even eating less.
Kenya's health minister announced that one suburb of the capital, Nairobi, as well as a part of the port city of Mombasa, will be cordoned off due to skyrocketing coronavirus cases. The number of cases has been gradually rising in Kenya, as in many other African countries. However, in recent days, it has become clear that the virus is spreading faster in several hotspots. Eastleigh, a suburb of Nairobi, has reported at least 68 cases, while Mombasa's Old Town has 64, out of a total of over 600 cases in the country. Health Minister Mutahi Kagwe said that from Wednesday for the next 15 days, there would be a ban on movement in and out of Eastleigh and Mombasa's Old Town. Kenya has so far reported 29 COVID-19 deaths nationwide. More than 50,000 cases of the novel coronavirus and over 2,000 deaths have now been reported across the African continent. According to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the continent has also reported that more than 17,000 people have recovered from the virus. South Africa remains the worst hit nation in terms of the reported figures, with more than 7,800 cases, while Nigeria leads Western Africa with a tally of more than 3,000 cases and over 100 deaths. The tiny nation of Djibouti appears as the worst hit in Eastern Africa, with more than 1,000 cases and a death toll of 3. Meanwhile, the mountainous kingdom of Lesotho, completely surrounded by South Africa, is the only African country that has not reported a single case of COVID-19. Several African nations have lifted some lockdown measures imposed to stem the spread of the coronavirus, despite concerns that a lack of testing means the real numbers remain unknown. President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, inaugurated an intensive care unit dedicated to COVID-19 patients at the Kinshasa Medical Center, set to open next week.
We are inaugurating our COVID disease treatment center for patients with the most severe forms of the disease. We will be able to receive the first patients at the beginning of next week, once the setup has been fully installed and the rest of the equipment has been put in place. We are going to see with the CMK, which has come to our rescue in relation to the increase in hospitalization capacity for patients who have COVID-19. We are going to talk with them to see how we can support them in treating patients.
Deadly floods have hit the East African nations of Kenya, Somalia and Rwanda. Flooding as a result of recent heavy rains has killed more than 260 people across East Africa. Kenya has been the hardest hit, with the government reporting almost 200 deaths. According to the Kenyan government, the floods have also washed away 8,000 acres of crops and destroyed vital infrastructure. Meanwhile, in Rwanda, 55 people have died, while 16 have been killed in Somalia. In Uganda, floods have trapped an estimated 200 patients inside a hospital. East African countries have also been hit recently by a locust invasion, in addition to the health crisis sparked by COVID-19. The rainy season normally lasts until June. Qatar has launched a new drive-through coronavirus testing program to assess the prevalence of the disease in the wider population beyond the worst affected groups where tests had been targeted. The country, with a population of 2.75 million people, has seen a relatively high number of cases, with almost 19,000 people testing positive for COVID-19. However, its death rate, with just 12 fatalities reported, is one of the world's lowest. Experts say that this is down to the country's young population and mandatory health checks for its vast foreign workforce. Migrant workers and Qataris returning from virus hotspots like Iran have been the focus of testing efforts, along with those found to have been in contact with them.
Well, I mean, the project aims at understanding what is the incidence and the prevalence of the disease in the community at large, because we have a lot of data coming from the labor community, but not much from the community of white collars, Qatari and other population groups.
Today marks the 81st anniversary of the birth of José Antonio Abreu, Venezuelan orchestra conductor, pianist and economist, who founded the El Sistema program in 1975 to help Venezuelan children learn to play musical instruments and be part of an orchestra. El Sistema was boosted under the Chavez government to become a nationwide network of youth orchestras, choirs and music centres, with its members playing across the world. And we finish this news brief with a performance in tribute to Maestro Abreu by the children of the El Sistema Orchestra in Zulia State. Remember, you can get all the latest news on our website, telesurenglish.net, as well as on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.